Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Really glad to have you with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity is away again today, and Inez Stepman of the Independent Women's Forum, also host of the High Noon podcast, in for Jim today. And for those of you who are listening, you can't see that she's got this giant poster of Gary Cooper behind her. So if you're ever wondering where the name High Noon came from, I'm just going to go on a limb, Inez, and say it has something to do with your affinity for that movie.
Yeah, this poster is actually the solidarity movement in Poland. And I think the American Western became like a symbol of freedom in the whole world. So it's just, and I love the movie and I love Gary Cooper. So it's just all of the above.
One quick update from yesterday's podcast. When we were talking about Pete Buttigieg saying we should be happy with the fact that the government has spent $7.5 billion on electric vehicle chargers, with not 700, not 7,000, 7 electrical vehicle chargers to show for it so far, and that he's totally confident we're going to have 500,000 by the end of the decade. I made the point that we've got somewhere between 900,000 and 1.8 million gas pumps in America, and that we'd probably need 10 times that in terms of electric vehicle chargers, given the length of time it takes to charge a vehicle compared to the time it takes to fill one up with gasoline. Turns out I was way off. It's not going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 million or anything like that. It's going to be 134.1 million that experts now believe, according to Wired magazine, is going to be required to replace gas pumps, which hopefully never happens. But the other weird part here, Inez, in addition to the fact that I don't think the grid's ever going to be able to handle that anytime soon, even if you could get all that online, they're expecting that a huge percentage of this is going to be installed in people's homes, which if you have a single family home and a garage, that could certainly be possible. But if you live in townhouses, if you live in major apartment complexes, if you live in cities where that's just not possible, getting that as the major source of EV charging is going to be virtually impossible. So once again, the pipe dream doesn't seem to match up with the facts. I don't know how much you've thought about it being in the heart of Manhattan, but any thoughts on that?
We have only like a handful of gas stations in Manhattan, which shocked me when I first moved here. So there isn't even room for gas stations, let alone room for charging ports in people's apartments. So I don't know how they think this is going to be possible. I am looking forward to the 70s gas line becoming the standard for charging up your car to go 150 miles.
Yeah, that's not going to be fun. So hopefully it all comes off the rails before then. Otherwise, big extension cord is going to be a very powerful lobby here in Washington before too long, because it's the only way people are going to get that done. But that's just an update from yesterday. Let's get to our fare today. I'm not really sure how to classify this. If Harvard was being honest about this, I suspect there would be some good news to this. But as one of elite higher ed's greatest critics, Inez, I'm sure you're not buying this either, but Harvard put together in April the Institutional Voice Working Group. And of course, in April, we were kind of at the peak of these campus encampments. It spilled over into May, and only mercifully, once students left campus, has that died down a little bit. But the working group, specifically at Harvard, is delighted to share, in their words, the working group's report containing a set of principles and recommendations that ground the use of institutional voice in the university's mission of seeking truth through open inquiry, debate, and weighing evidence. In particular, the report concludes that, quote, the university and its leaders should not issue official statements about public matters that do not directly affect the university's core function as an academic institution. It reasons that when the university speaks officially on matters outside of its institutional area of expertise, such statements risk compromising the integrity and credibility of our academic mission and may undermine open inquiry and academic freedom by making, quote, it more difficult for some members of the community to express their views when they differ from the university's official position. So, Inez, I think that's a really fancy way of saying a lot of donors got really upset with the fact that we let pro-Palestinian or maybe even pro-Hamas demonstrations go on too long. So we're going to tamp that down a little bit. How do you see this? I don't think that they're going to stay quiet on things that don't divide Democrats, but Can they actually stick to this?
No, I agree with you. Doubtful. Look, I'm all in favor of university statements that recognize the limits of their own quote unquote expertise, but I don't see them becoming any kind of fixture across the board anytime soon. This is obviously a fig leaf maneuver. It's the same thing with these appeals to free speech. By the way, I'm pretty hardcore, free speech. I wouldn't say an absolutist, but I'm pretty far on the civil libertarian side when it comes to free speech, but only an idiot would not recognize that this is just part of the moves. That the position of universities on quote unquote free speech is driven by the cause, not by that they now want to support or don't want to support, and not by any kind of principled free speech position. And I feel like actually the right is too needy, too desperate. We're also excited to hear these institutions actually commit themselves in words to free speech, imagining that is actually going to apply to any cause that the left is united in hating. And it just isn't. I mean, you're a fool if you believe that. These universities will go right back to their anti-speech policies when it's about the election, when it's about Trump, when it's about conservative speakers coming to campus. That nothing has quote unquote changed just because they're paying lip service to free speech now.
No, I think that's right. So in addition to the fact that their donors, potentially some of them weren't happy, they see this as an issue that mainly divides the left. And right now during an election season, they don't want to divide the left. And so if the protests continue once students are back on campus, they're probably going to have to let those unfold to a certain extent. But in terms of the university staying out of it, I think that's one of their major motivations. So, yeah, count us both cynical on Harvard's sudden lurch to free and open inquiry from all directions here, because if Trump gets elected and then he moves forward with his plan to deport a lot of these 10, 11 million people who came to the country illegally, something tells me Harvard's leadership isn't going to just stay quiet during that whole debate. They could prove me wrong. They won't, though.
No, they won't prove you wrong, and it's naive to think otherwise. This is a strategic argument on the part of certain pieces of leftist institutions, although they're at war with themselves. Honestly, we shouldn't allow them to take our eye off the ball, which is you see how universities are responsive to essentially the stick as opposed to the carrot, right? When donors are pulling money, universities at some point have to sit up and pay attention. The biggest funder of universities are all of us, and that goes for private universities as well as public. I mean, student loan funds flowing directly from the Department of Education, grants flowing from the federal government. Those are the lifeblood of virtually every, 99% of universities from the Ivy League all the way down. There's a handful of exceptions. So we are the biggest investors in universities. And the fact that they're sitting up and taking notice, even in this very sort of two-faced way, when just a few big donors are looking at pulling out money, should point the way for Republicans that actually the behavior of universities is entirely within our control as a polity. It's a perfectly legitimate political exercise if we're funding them to start exercising some amount of oversight over their behavior, considering that it's been not just in this instance about Israel and Gaza, but for decades and decades now. It's directly in opposition and spitting in the face of people who are paying to fund these universities unwillingly. At least the donors had a choice.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like on the right, so many on the right are a cheap date on so many of these issues. The one that always comes to mind is celebrities. We never like it when leftist celebrities are dominating, but if there's ever a celebrity on the right who tends to speak up, oh, well, they're the greatest thing we've ever seen.
Nominate that person for president.
Yes, exactly.
Immediately.
Exactly right. That's how we got Arnold Schwarzenegger in California.
That is what I was thinking of, yes, California.
Right. And so in a situation like this, you're going to have a lot of people on the right going, all right, put some pressure on Harvard. They're not going to get involved in this anymore. That's a huge win. A real win would be what you described, taxing endowments and putting a lot of pressure on them through taxpayer funds to really shape up and stop being a leftist indoctrination center. So I don't think the right is ready to do that yet, but hopefully I'm wrong about that. I'll tell you one thing I'm not wrong about, though, and that's the awesomeness of Omaha steaks. 2 weeks from Sunday is Father's Day. And I know you want to get him the tie and go ahead and get him the card. As a dad, I love to get those things, but I'll tell you what I really want. Steak. Also other stuff, pork chops, burgers, jumbo franks, and you're going to get all of that from Omaha Steaks. I always love getting the big crate from Omaha Steaks because I know the meat is going to be fantastic. Mrs. Corumbus does a great job of preparing it. And right now for Father's Day, you can give Dad a deluxe Father's Day gift for just $89.99. You will get Omaha Steaks Butcher's Cut top sirloins, juicy boneless pork chops, deli-style gourmet jumbo franks, the legendary Omaha Steaks burgers, plus 4 additional burgers free. But make sure you use the promo code Martini when you order. So this year, show Dad the love with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com to order the deluxe Father's Day gift package with 20 unforgettable entrees plus 4 free burgers for just $89.99 when you use the promo code Martini. That's omahasteaks.com, promo code Martini. All right, Inez, let's talk about our double-barreled bad martini here. President Biden trying to fool people and weaken our national security and basically bring gas prices down so people don't hold it against him a few months from now. We're just about 5 months away from the election, and early voting starts well before that. Gas prices, according to President Biden, in a tweet that he issued yesterday, or somebody did in his name, gas prices are down $1.40 from their peak after Russia's war. Well, you can parse that in a million different ways, but they're still too high. My administration is releasing 1 million barrels of gasoline from the Northeast Gasoline Supply Reserve ahead of July 4th, which will lower prices at the pump when folks need it most. There's a handy little chart from one of the people who replied to this, and it shows that back in 2017, when Trump took office, we had just under 700 million barrels in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Around the time that Biden took office, we were a little under 650 million barrels. We bottomed out at just under 350 million barrels in the middle of last year. Now it's ticked up a little above 350 million, and Biden's ready to attack it again to score some political points. So, Inez, we don't have much on hand if there is an emergency, and this is just like the last time he went selling the Strategic Petroleum Reserves to make people forget that he is responsible and his deep spending and inflationary policies for gas prices going up. I went and looked. It was $2.37 on average the day he took office, $3.33 in January of 2022, which is before the Russians invaded Ukraine. Obviously, the markets don't like uncertainty, so they did go up after Russia invaded Ukraine, but his contention going on 2+ years now that it's all because of Russia is ridiculous, and I'm curious as to what you think of his tactic.
Well, a couple things. One, the spike in oil prices, to give him his due, the spike in oil prices, I mean, there was speculation that Russia was amassing troops on the border, that there may be an invasion of Ukraine, and that did feed into the spike. That being said, I really think that historians will look back at this period of time in the West and genuinely puzzle over why the U.S. And Western powers more generally gave up such incredible geopolitical strategic advantages in not pursuing domestic energy production to the hilt. There is no sort of realpolitik explanation for that. It is truly a sort of ideological commitment, not to mention in all of these clean agreements, quote unquote, right? These climate change agreements, we give away not only money, but strategic advantage to the Chinese, et cetera, et cetera. I really think people are going to look back and wonder what kind of mental virus took over the West that they would give up such important geopolitical strategic advantages in order not to make money drilling our own oil here in the United States. It's truly sort of puzzling from the exterior perspective. Of course, within the interior perspective, we know why we're doing this. It's an ideological commitment and a fanatical one at that. But yes, I mean, the Strategic Reserve selling off a large piece of it, I didn't realize it had gone that far. I mean, from what you just said, the numbers, it sounds like we've sold off, about 40% of the Strategic Oil Reserve for essentially election gimmicks. This is completely unserious. It adds to all the ways in which we are unprepared to fight a major war. And this is just one more thing to worry about from that perspective. In terms of election chances, I think Americans know that the overall state of the economy, whether it's gas prices, inflation, just general malaise in the economy, I think they know that Biden's policies have contributed to it. That's why he has consistently low, below 40% approval ratings on the economy, and that those haven't really changed dramatically in recent months. So I don't know. I don't think this is going to work either. I think Americans they've recognized. I think they might have, maybe if it was for a certain period of time, but now we're looking back for 3 years without, any kind of bright spot, really, for a lot of people in the economy. The Wall Street Journal released those fantastic graphs that showed the first 3 years of the Biden administration. The people are treading water, that we actually lost wealth for the last 3 years, and we're just now coming back to treading water in the same place in net worth of the average American as we were 3 years ago. And that's compared with inflation-adjusted 16% growth under the first 3 years of the Trump administration. I think that those fundamentals, even aside from any of the details or selling off or like this kind of gimmicky stuff, I think those details really have sunk in, and I think it's going to be very difficult to convince the American people that Biden has nothing to do with the economic outlook that they're feeling.
The Chinese thing also just frustrates me because, they're probably certainly one of, and probably our greatest geopolitical adversary right now in terms of what they can actually accomplish. Things like this where Biden will sell them our energy is annoying. And then the thing that actually gets the headlines about China, the pandas are coming back to the National Zoo, Inez. So that's going to get massive headlines today. So we're just not serious in terms of our meeting our politics when it comes to China either.
Yeah, I have to say, I've never understood the hype around pandas. I know that's really going to be really unpopular, but there are so many other cuter animals at the zoo. I don't understand why we're so obsessed with pandas. Look, nature has selected them for extinction, man. They don't know how to keep themselves alive.
You're not the only one I've heard say that. It is unpopular, but you're not wrong. You're not wrong. Quickly on the double-barreled aspect of this, in your home state of California, they've passed what are officially known as gasoline price gouging laws, which sounds good. But in addition to that, they have nestled in here the possibility that the state may try something never attempted before, according to Barron's, capping the profits of the energy companies that make the fuel, which means that Chevron and some other top gasoline producers in the state are fighting it aggressively, saying the move will backfire and potentially cause prices to rise even more. Yeah, when you're not allowed to make a profit, you're going to have to charge more. And I guess the left still doesn't get that.
Yeah, and this doesn't just affect California because California is such a huge market that it ends up major companies end up making concessions in California that end up affecting prices all across the country. Same thing with cars, right? When California passes some ridiculous new miles per gallon standard, and a lot of car manufacturers just have to start producing according to California standards because the market is so large within the United States. So this is not just a California problem. California gas prices are out of control, and they're out of control even in comparison to the rest of the country. I don't have the averages off the top of my head, but I have friends in LA who are regularly paying $6-7 a gallon, where even in Manhattan, New York City, it's $4 or $5 a gallon, and consistently it's higher. The taxes are higher on gas already. So if they wanted to drop the prices immediately at the pump, they could give a gas tax holiday in California, and that would be a substantial cut off the top of fuel prices in California. But of course, that's not what they're interested in doing. They're interested in, and this is, by the way, this is the tack of the Biden campaign as well, having not succeeded in gaslighting Americans about the economy being great. The new sort of messaging angle has been the reason the economy is not great and prices are high is because companies are gouging customers, or taking advantage of the situation to raise their prices even more. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't happen ever, but I believe the San Francisco Fed just put out a study that showed over the last 3 years, those margins have remained basically steady. So there are a couple industries where that's not the case, but overall, it's pretty clear that inflation is not being primarily driven by corporate greed, which is the new tack. I don't think this is going to work. It's too sustained. It's been 3 years now. we see the weak points in the economy that are hitting us in our, I know my family, we feel it, like going to the grocery store. I think it's sort of a lost cause on their part. I think this election, to the extent that Biden has a chance to recover in this election and win it, I think it's probably going to be despite what Americans believe he's done to the economy and not because of it.
And not only will California Democrats not suspend the gas tax, they're now toying around with 3 cents a mile tax for however many miles you drive. They're starting a pilot program out there, and so I'm sure if they have
that'll
a chance
help.
to,
Yeah, that'll help everybody's pocketbook. Yeah, that should work.
They just don't get it. All right, Inez, let's go to our, again, double-barreled crazy martini now. And the first part of this played out very close to you in Manhattan yesterday as the closing arguments went from both the defense and the prosecution in the Trump hush money case. And for some reason, after laying fairly low throughout the entire trial, the Biden campaign, the Biden White House, has decided that they just need to inject themselves now. First, we heard that Biden's going to make a statement, whatever the verdict might be, from a White House setting, not a campaign setting. And then suddenly on the day of these closing arguments, they say there's going to be a Biden-Harris team outside the courthouse making a pitch for re-electing him, and there's going to be special guests. Well, the most prominent special guest was Robert De Niro, who came with a prepared statement outside the courthouse about why you got to vote for Joe Biden. Here's what he said.
And elections, forget about it. That's over. That's done. If he gets in, I can tell you right now, he will never leave. He will never leave. You know that. He will never leave. What does that mean? Is that the country we want to live in? Do we want him running this country and saying, I'm not leaving, I'm dictator for life? I hope this new ad campaign reaches outside the bubble to remind supporters of what a danger he is to our lives. This is not a threat. This is a reality. And that's why I've joined the Biden-Harris campaign, because the only way to preserve our freedoms and hold on to our humanity is to vote for Joe Biden for president. Really. We don't have a choice.
The only choice is to not have a choice. We have to vote for Joe Biden. So I'm sure his pitch to Trump voters, Inez, was very, very effective. And I'm sure they're rethinking their entire calculation at this point. My question is, what in the world was the calculation of the Biden campaign to not only inject itself, but to do so in such a spectacle where De Niro ended up getting in a shouting match with Trump supporters there, to the point where the New York Post headline today is Raging Bull. If you can fill in the 4 letters after that.
New York Post is undefeated in terms of these headlines.
All they had to do was nothing here, and they just couldn't help themselves.
It's amazing. I'd rather listen to that car alarm going off than listen to Robert De Niro. I thought he, maybe it was always the scripts he had in front of him that were better, but you would think an actor would be able to read off of a teleprompter in a more convincing way and not stumbling over his words. It's particularly funny because, look, on the right, we're a little bit, we alluded to it earlier in the first martini, we're a little hard up when it comes to celebrities. We tend to get super excited when some D-lister says one thing that we agree with. We're just really, really thrilled about it. But supposedly, the left has access to the entirety of Hollywood, and this is what they came up with, this stunt with Robert De Niro. It seems like they're really batting below their average when it comes to celebrity endorsements. But in any case, the substance of what he said, of course, is ludicrous in terms of the paranoia. I will point out, there is an element of seriousness here. And it runs the other way, right? Why is it, among many reasons, why is it that Caesar crossed the Rubicon, right? It's because he was going to lose immunity to prosecution. One way to make sure that you do have an incentive for people to stay in office for life and to throw over Republican government is to prosecute your political opposition when they lose elections. which is exactly what's happening in the United States. Now, we usually think about that happening in Latin America and banana republics, but and I know that people are probably sick of hearing the phrase banana republic, but that's actually what's happening here. I don't think Donald Trump is going to stay in office forever, but we are setting up an incentive for people to do that. If there's a precedent set where, the former president is prosecuted when he leaves office, well, then there's a big incentive for him not to leave office and to retain that power of prosecution. And that is actually incredibly dangerous. So if you talk about quote unquote norms and violations of norms, that is a huge violation of a norm that we kept for over 250 years. And for such petty charges, right? For novel legal theories that are like scratching your left ear with your right hand. I mean, like threading together a misdemeanor and that's out of statute of limitations alongside a felony, right? I mean, in such a convoluted way, violating these 250 years of norms that are the most basic about the peaceful transfer of power. And then standing out there with Robert De Niro and saying, yeah, the real worry here is Trump. Trump might stay in office.
We do have a celebrity on the right, though. He's making some news today, and that's Dennis Quaid. He's not only going to play Ronald Reagan in a movie that's going to be released later this year, but he was on with Piers Morgan explaining why he's going to vote for Trump. And so a lot of folks on the right are wondering whether this is going to be the argument that a lot of people move over to Trump.
I was ready not to vote for Trump until what I saw is more than politics. I see a weaponization of our justice system, and a challenge to our Constitution, us as Americans, that I don't think we're going to have.
So Biden and his followers think that calling Trump a convicted felon, if he's convicted, is going to depress Trump's numbers. Trump supporters think that what they see as perverted justice is going to draw more people over to Trump's side. I believe that both sides are so entrenched right now, you're really playing with thin numbers on the margin. But what do you think here? If he is convicted and given another outlandish sentence like he was in the fraud trial, is that going to drive people closer to Trump that wouldn't otherwise support him? Or is Dennis Quaid an outlier more than the tip of the iceberg here?
It's really hard to say because, as you say, it's on the margins, right? I do think the lawfare against Trump excites his base, and I do think more Trump supporters may turn out to support Trump. I think he's used this as well as he possibly could. That, again, returning to the New York Post, that mugshot seen around the world. I mean, he is a PR master. He's a master of charisma in that sense. So I don't think it's hurt him, although I wouldn't downplay the fact that he can't campaign across the country. Like those rallies that we saw the rally in the Bronx with that great energy. But I mean, that's a large part of how he campaigned in 2016 as well as 2020. And that's not open to him right now because he has to be sitting in a courtroom most of the time. Look, the flip side of that is some people say, like, it's good. It forces him to release basically one statement a day, right? Yeah. It provides some structure and discipline. But overall, I do think sometimes the right gets a little too cavalier about the advantages that the Trump campaign actually is losing as a form of this illegitimate lawfare against him, both financially and then opportunity costs during the campaign. My prediction that it's totally possible that Trump will win the election from jail is looking stronger than with each passing day. No, I mean, I'm laughing, but it's what we talked about a minute ago, right? It's terrifying. It's terrifying to watch this in the United States of America. That being said, the people who are on the margin here, I don't know. If I had to guess, I would say the Democratic argument about this is wrong, that people will, flip, that there are people who would vote for Trump but won't because he's convicted. I think at this point, if you're even at all open to voting for Trump, you think these cases are political. I think there's probably some people on the margins who also think like, well, he brought this on himself. Like he hasn't conducted himself in an upright way, like if you hadn't been paying off porn stars that you'd been sleeping with. I think there are people who don't like Trump who are in the middle, who this doesn't necessarily like push them away, but I think it's a stretch to say that it helps him. I think maybe the right is over their skis on that. If you think that him not being able to campaign, pouring millions of dollars into legal battles, and then ultimately coming out of this, if he does convicted, that's going to be a boost to his campaign, I think is probably an overly optimistic argument.
We'll find out probably fairly soon whether he's going to be a convicted felon, and then we'll see where it goes from there and just how much of a victory lap Joe Biden mumbles through whenever that happens, if it happens. But We'll see. There only needs to be one juror that says no to that for the judge to be really, really upset.
Yeah, can I say something about that? I'm not as convinced, and maybe I'll be totally wrong on this, but I'm not as convinced as a lot of people on the right that that there won't be like 1 or 2 or 3 jurors, even in Manhattan, who are open to listening to the fact that this case is a complete pile of crap. First of all, even in Manhattan, you had Trump got like between 12 and I think it was 12.5 or 15% even in the island of Manhattan. So statistically, you have like 1.8 jurors out of 12 who would be Trump voters. But even if that's not the case, I mean, I think people are maybe, again, too pessimistic. I feel the same way, by the way, about the Daniel Penny trial that we're going to see coming up in October. I think there are some people in New York with some common sense. So I'm not saying I would bet the farm on the fact that he's not going to jail and not going to be convicted, but people seem to be taking it as a foregone conclusion that he'll be convicted because of the venue of the trial. And I'm not in that camp, I don't think.
Inez, thanks so much for being with us today, and we'll do it again tomorrow. See you then.
See you then. Thanks so much.
Inez Stepman of the Independent Women's Forum, also host of the High Noon podcast. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Do subscribe to the podcast. If you don't already, please tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Get all of us on X. Inez is at Inez Felcher. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Wednesday and join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.